The red sun of Varath 7 hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the military base. Taemin wiped the sweat from his forehead and adjusted his tool belt. He stood at the edge of the defensive barrier, checking the power relays for the third time that day. Everything had to be perfect. The aliens didn't trust humans to do much else. 3 months had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Coalition. 3 months of being treated like fragile children who might break at any moment. Taemin had stopped counting how many times he heard the jokes. The soft skins. The breakable ones. The species that dies if you breathe on them too hard. Behind him, Dongjun was calibrating the shield generators. His friend worked quietly, like always. They both knew better than to complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. "Engineer!" a harsh voice called out. Taemin turned to see Lieutenant Borvik approaching. The reptilian officer's scales gleamed in the sunlight, thick as armor plating. His yellow eyes looked at Taemin with barely hidden contempt. "Are you finished yet? Or does your delicate constitution require another rest break?" Taemin swallowed his anger. "The relays are working perfectly, sir. All systems are operational." Borvik snorted, a sound like rocks grinding together. "See that they stay that way. We can't afford to have equipment fail because a human forgot to tighten a bolt." He walked away without waiting for a response. Dongjun approached, shaking his head. "One of these days someone's going to—" "Don't," Taemin interrupted. "It's not worth it. They had bigger problems to worry about." The Ravagers were getting closer every day. The enemy forces had been pushing toward coalition positions for weeks now. Everyone could feel it. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Taemin gathered his tools and started walking back toward the engineering depot. The base was a mix of different species, all working together to hold the line against the Ravagers. Insectoid soldiers with chitinous armor patrolled the walls. Massive armored beings that looked like walking tanks stood guard at the gates. Floating energy beings drifted through the air, their bodies protected by natural force fields. And then there were the humans. Soft skin, breakable bones. No natural armor, no energy shields, no thick scales or protective shells. Just flesh and blood and determination that nobody seemed to care about. At the command center, Captain Heywan was arguing with Commander Velcross again. Taemin could hear her voice from outside the building. She was one of the few humans allowed inside the command center, and she never stopped fighting for her people. "My soldiers are trained and ready," Heywan was saying. "We can contribute more than just maintenance work." Commander Velcross's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been pity. The insectoid commander stood twice as tall as Heywan, his exoskeleton gleaming black and red. "Captain, I respect your enthusiasm, but you must understand our position. Your species is simply not built for combat. One hit from a Ravager weapon would tear through your body like it wasn't even there. We're tougher than you think. Are you?" Velcross gestured to a monitor showing footage from the last battle. A Ravager plasma bolt struck an armored soldier, sending him flying backward. The soldier got up, his natural armor scorched but intact. That shot would have killed a human instantly. "I cannot in good conscience send your people into harm's way." Heywan's jaw clenched. "So we're just supposed to stay in the back? Hide while everyone else fights? You provide valuable support. Medical aid, technical expertise, logistical coordination. These are important roles. We didn't come here to be safe. We came here to fight." Velcross's mandibles clicked together in what Taemin had learned was a sign of frustration. "The decision is final, Captain. Your people remain in rear echelon positions. That is an order." Heywan saluted stiffly and walked out of the command center. She passed Taemin without seeing him, her face tight with anger and disappointment. That evening, Taemin sat in the human quarters with the rest of his squad. The room was small, tucked away in the corner of the base. Yuna, their medic, was cleaning her equipment. She had kind eyes and steady hands, but Taemin had seen the frustration in her face too. She wanted to help people, but the aliens wouldn't let her near the front lines. "Did you hear?" Dongjun said, looking up from his tablet. "The Ravagers broke through the southern defensive line on Kelrix 4. 3,000 coalition soldiers dead." Yuna's hands stilled. How many could have been saved with proper medical attention? "Does it matter?" Dongjun replied bitterly. "They don't want us there anyway." Taemin didn't say anything. What was there to say? They all felt the same way. Useless, unwanted, underestimated. The alarm woke them at 0400 hours. Taemin rolled out of his bunk, already reaching for his boots. The klaxon sound meant only one thing. Enemy activity detected. In the command center, officers from a dozen species crowded around the tactical displays. Taemin and his squad were called in for an emergency repair mission. One of the forward defensive barriers had suffered a malfunction. They needed to fix it before the Ravagers could exploit the weakness. Velocros looked at them with what might have been concern. The forward position is currently secure, but we're detecting increased enemy movement in that sector. Complete your repairs quickly and return to the base immediately. Understood, Commander, Taemin replied. War Master Threxus, one of the armored behemoth soldiers, laughed at them as they prepared to leave. His species was built like living tanks, with thick armor plating that could withstand almost anything. Try not to trip and hurt yourselves, soft skins. The walk to the forward position is almost a whole kilometer. His squad laughed with him. Taemin ignored them and led his team out. The walk to the forward defensive position took 20 minutes. The barrier stood at the edge of a rocky plain, surrounded by equipment and supply caches. Taemin's squad got to work immediately, identifying the problem and beginning repairs. The work took longer than expected. The damage was worse than the initial reports suggested. Taemin found himself deep in the machinery, rerouting power systems and replacing burned-out components. Dongjun was on his back under a relay station when the long-range sensors began screaming warnings. Taemin's communicator crackled to life. All units, this is command. Incoming artillery barrage. Massive ordnance detected. Clear the forward positions immediately. Repeat, clear the forward positions now. Taemin looked at the half-repaired barrier, then at his squad. They were still deep in their work. The evacuation order came again, more urgent this time. Pack up, Taemin ordered. We need to. The sky turned white. For a moment everything was light and heat and sound. Then the world exploded around them. The last thing Taemin remembered before the blast wave hit was Dongjun's face, eyes wide with shock. Then there was nothing but fire and thunder and darkness rushing up to meet him. The command center erupted into chaos. Screens showed massive explosions tearing across the forward positions. Plasma artillery, the kind that could level buildings and vaporize armored vehicles, rained down from the sky like angry red meteors. Commander Velcross stood frozen at the tactical display, his compound eyes reflecting the flames on the screen. Get me a damage report. How many of our people were in that zone? An officer checked the roster. 47 coalition soldiers, Commander, and the human engineering squad. 5 humans total. Velcross's mandibles clicked together slowly. 5 humans. 5 soft, fragile beings caught in a plasma bombardment. He had seen what those weapons did to armored soldiers. What they would do to unprotected human bodies didn't bear thinking about. Status of the human squad? He asked, though he already knew the answer. No communication, sir. All signals from that sector are dead. In the medical bay, Yuna heard the news and felt her stomach drop. She knew that squad. Taemin and Dongjun were her friends. They ate breakfast together every morning. She knew Taemin liked his coffee bitter, and that Dongjun had a sister back on Earth he talked about constantly. She ran to the command center, her medical kit bouncing against her hip. Lieutenant Borvik stood near the entrance, watching the screens with satisfaction. The Ravagers are testing our defenses, he said to another officer. They want to see how we respond. I need to go out there, Yuna said, pushing past him. Search and rescue. There might be survivors. Borvik looked at her like she had gone insane. Survivors? Of a plasma bombardment? Nothing survives that without serious armor plating, human. Your friends are dead. Accept it. You don't know that. You need to stay here and stop wasting everyone's time. Borvik turned away from her. Commander Velcros has already ordered the forward positions abandoned. We're falling back to secondary defensive lines. Yuna wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Borvik and shake him until he understood. But she knew it wouldn't matter. To them, humans were already dead. Fragile things that broke under the slightest pressure. The bombardment continued for 17 minutes. When it finally stopped, the silence felt worse than the noise. Smoke rose from dozens of craters, each one deep enough to hide a building. The defensive barrier that Taemin's squad had been repairing was gone, vaporized into atoms. Coalition soldiers began emerging from their shelters and bunkers. Those with heavy armor had survived by digging in deep. Those with energy shields had weathered the storm. Even then, many were wounded. War Master Threxus pulled himself out of a crater, his thick armor scorched black and cracked in several places. His squad gathered around him, checking his injuries. Burns covered his body where the plasma had found gaps in his natural protection. "That was the worst I've ever endured," Threxus said, his voice rough with pain. "The intensity, the duration. If I didn't have my armor, I would be dead 10 times over." The medics rushed to treat the wounded. Coalition soldiers were pulled from the rubble, their bodies broken but alive. The armored ones would survive. The ones with natural shields would recover. But the humans caught in that bombardment? Nobody even bothered to look for them. In the command center, Velcros was reorganizing the defensive positions when his communications officer suddenly went quiet. The insectoid was staring at one of the external camera feeds with all 4 of his eyes wide. "Commander," the officer said slowly, "you need to see this." Velcros looked at the screen. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. The largest crater from the bombardment filled the view, smoke still rising from its scorched walls. The crater was at least 20 meters deep, a wound torn into the planet's surface by weapons designed to destroy fortified positions, and someone was climbing out of it. The figure was small compared to most coalition species. Burned uniform hanging in tatters, face covered in ash and blood, moving slowly but steadily up the crater's steep wall. Human. "That's impossible," Velcros whispered. The human reached the top of the crater and stood. Through the smoke and heat distortion, they could see him more clearly now. It was Taemin, the engineer they had sent to repair the barrier. The one who should have been vaporized by the first plasma bolt, but he wasn't dead. He was standing, and he was carrying something over his shoulder. "Magnify that image," Velcros ordered. The camera zoomed in. Taemin was carrying an alien soldier, one of the reptilian scouts who had been in the same area. The soldier was unconscious, his scales cracked and bleeding, but alive. Taemin had pulled him from the bombardment zone and was carrying him to safety. Behind Taemin, more figures emerged from the smoke. Dongjun appeared, supporting an injured insectoid soldier. 2 more human engineers followed, helping 3 more wounded aliens between them. The command center went completely silent. Every officer, every soldier, every being present stood and watched as 5 humans walked through the smoking wasteland. They moved through terrain still hot enough to melt boot soles, past craters still glowing with residual plasma energy, through an area that should have killed anything without heavy protection, and they were carrying wounded soldiers. Taemin's squad walked for nearly 2 kilometers. Every step must have been agony. The heat, the injuries, the weight of the soldiers they carried. But they didn't stop. They didn't rest. They just kept walking. Borvik was the first to reach them when they arrived at the evacuation point. The reptilian officer's earlier arrogance had vanished completely. He stared at Taemin with something approaching awe. "How?" Borvik asked. "How did you survive?" "The plasma bombardment, the heat, we got low," Taemin said, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. "Found a supply cache with some shielding. Waited it out." He carefully lowered the reptilian soldier to the ground. "This one was hurt bad. He needs medical attention." Yuna ran up with her medical kit, tears streaming down her face. "You're alive." "You're all alive." "More or less," Dongjun said with a weak smile. He had burns up both arms and a nasty gash across his forehead, but he was standing. "Could use some water, though." Medical teams swarmed the area, treating both the rescued aliens and the human squad. Yuna worked on Taemin, cataloging his injuries with growing disbelief. 2nd-degree burns across his back and arms, 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, lacerations from shrapnel, a fractured wrist. "You walked 2 kilometers with these injuries?" she asked. "Had to," Taemin replied simply. "Couldn't leave them behind." One by one, the medical reports came in. All 5 humans were injured, some worse than others. Dongjun had a punctured lung. Another engineer had a compound fracture in his leg. Every single one of them should have been incapacitated by their wounds. Yet they had all remained conscious. All stayed focused on the mission. All made the walk back to safety while carrying others. War Master Threxus approached as Yuna was bandaging Taemin's burns. The massive warrior looked at the small human with new eyes. His own injuries from the bombardment had required serious medical intervention, and he had been protected by armor that could stop most weapons. "I couldn't have made that walk," Threxus admitted quietly. "Not with those injuries. Not carrying others," he paused. "I called you softskins. I was wrong." Taemin looked up at him. "We're tougher than we look." Commander Velcros watched from a distance as the human squad was treated. His entire understanding of humanity was being rewritten in real time. These weren't the fragile beings he had imagined. They were something else entirely. Something he had failed to recognize. He thought about all the times he had denied Captain Haywan's requests, all the times he had kept humans away from combat roles because he wanted to protect them, because he thought they were too delicate, too breakable, too soft. He had been so very wrong. As night fell over Vareth 7, the base was quiet. The wounded were being treated. The defensive lines were being reorganized. And in the human quarters, 5 engineers slept the sleep of the exhausted but victorious. Tomorrow things would be different. Commander Velcros had already made his decision. Humanity had proven something today. Not that they were invincible, but that they were survivors. That they could endure things that would break others. That they belonged on the front lines after all. Admiral Kresh's flagship hung in orbit like a small moon. The vessel was massive, built to command entire fleets and carry thousands of soldiers. In his private office, the Admiral watched the footage from Vareth 7 for the 3rd time that day. He was old by the standards of his species, his carapace marked with battle scars from dozens of campaigns. He had fought the Ravagers for 20 years and had seen every kind of soldier the Coalition could field. He thought he understood combat and what it took to survive in war. Then he watched 5 humans walk out of a plasma bombardment crater. "Bring me everything we have on human military history," he ordered his staff. "I want to know how they fight. How they train. What makes them different." The reports that came back were fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. Human warfare was brutal in ways that most Coalition species found difficult to understand. They didn't just fight to win. They fought beyond the point where victory should have been impossible. One report detailed a battle from human history called Stalingrad. The humans had fought in the ruins of their own city for months through freezing winter, with limited supplies, eating whatever they could find. Most species would have surrendered or retreated. The humans kept fighting. Another report described soldiers in a place called Thermopylae, who held a narrow pass against an army 100 times their size, knowing they would die. They fought anyway because it would buy time for others to escape. A third report showed human medics in a war they called World War I, running into poison gas and artillery fire to save wounded soldiers. No armor, no protection, just determination and a refusal to leave anyone behind. Kresh read them all and began to understand. Humans didn't survive because they were strong or well-armored. They survived because they refused to accept death. They would keep fighting, keep moving, keep trying until their bodies literally couldn't function anymore. And sometimes even then, on Vareth 7, Taemin's squad was cleared for duty after 5 days of recovery. Their injuries were healing faster than the alien doctors expected. Yuna explained that humans healed quickly compared to many species, another evolutionary advantage from their predator ancestry. The reconnaissance mission briefing was held in a secure room. Taemin, Dongjun, and 3 other human soldiers sat alongside elite troops from 4 different species. Commander Velcros presented the mission parameters. The Ravagers have established a forward command post approximately 40 kilometers behind their lines, Velcros explained, pointing to a holographic map. Our intelligence indicates they're planning a major offensive. We need information on their troop movements, supply lines, and tactical plans. An elite scout named Sylvan spoke up. His species was built for stealth, with natural camouflage abilities and silent movement. The terrain is hostile. Swamp environment, toxic atmosphere, poor visibility. We'll need to move fast and quiet. How toxic? Dongjun asked. Acidic enough to burn through most organic materials within hours, another officer replied. Standard protective gear should handle it, but you'll need to be careful. Taemin studied the map carefully. The approach route wound through difficult terrain, and there were multiple points where they could be detected. What's the extraction plan if things go wrong? There isn't one, Velcros said bluntly. This is a volunteer mission. Once you're behind enemy lines, you're on your own until you complete the objective and make it back to Coalition territory. The room was quiet. This was a suicide mission by any reasonable standard. Even the elite soldiers looked uncomfortable. I'm in, Taemin said. Dongjun nodded. Same. One by one, the rest of the team volunteered. Sylvan looked at the humans with new respect. These soft-skinned beings were volunteering for a mission that scared trained killers. The insertion went smoothly. They dropped from low orbit in a stealth transport, landing in the swamp well before dawn. The team consisted of 12 soldiers, 5 humans, 3 reptilian scouts including Sylvan, 2 armored warriors, and 2 insectoid communication specialists. The swamp was worse than the briefing suggested. The water was thick and oily, bubbling with chemicals that gave off noxious fumes. The air tasted metallic and wrong. Within an hour, one of the armored warriors was having trouble breathing, his natural filtration systems overwhelmed by the toxic atmosphere. "We need to move faster," Sylvan said. "This environment is degrading our equipment." They pushed deeper into enemy territory. The humans adapted quickly, using pieces of cloth to filter the worst of the fumes and finding paths through the swamp that avoided the most toxic pools. Taman noticed that while the alien soldiers were struggling with the environment, the humans seemed to be handling it better. "Versatile immune systems," he explained to Sylvan quietly. "We can adapt to a lot of different environments. Earth has many different climate zones, so our species evolved to handle variety." 3 hours into the mission, things went wrong. A Ravager patrol stumbled across their position. The ambush was sudden and brutal. Energy weapons lit up the swamp, turning the toxic mist into a glowing fog. One of the armored warriors went down first, his heavy armor making him an easy target. The insectoid communication specialists tried to retreat but were cut off. The team found themselves scattered and pinned down in the acidic swamp water. Taemin was separated from the others, crouched behind a fallen tree that was slowly dissolving in the toxic water. His protective suit had tears in it, and he could feel the acidic water burning his skin wherever it touched. It hurt, everything hurt, but he kept moving. He spotted one of the insectoid specialists trapped in an open area, injured and unable to move. Ravager fire was getting closer. In seconds, the soldier would be dead. Taemin didn't think. He just ran. He crossed the open ground in a sprint, ignoring the weapons fire that tore through the air around him. He grabbed the insectoid soldier and dragged him back to cover. The acidic water splashed across his arms and face, burning like liquid fire. "You're insane," the insectoid gasped. "Probably," Taemin agreed, checking his weapon. "Can you move?" "I think so." Dongjun appeared from the mist along with 2 other humans. They had found each other and regrouped. "The Ravagers are pushing our position. We need to break through their line and keep moving." Yuna had been included in the mission as their medic. She was treating the injured armored warrior, working fast despite the hostile environment. "He needs real medical attention. The toxic atmosphere is poisoning him." "We can't stay here," Sylvan said, joining them. "We're surrounded." Taemin looked at the situation with an engineer's eye. They were outnumbered in hostile terrain, with injured soldiers and no backup. By any logical assessment, they were dead, but humans weren't always logical. "Dongjun, help Yuna move the wounded. Sylvan, you're with me. We're going to make a hole in their line and everyone is getting through it." "That's suicide," Sylvan protested. "Only if we fail," Taemin replied. "And we're not going to fail." What happened next became the subject of tactical analysis reports for months afterward. 2 humans and 1 stealth specialist attacked a Ravager position that should have been unassailable. They used the environment to their advantage, turning the toxic swamp into a weapon. They moved through terrain that the better-equipped Ravagers couldn't navigate, and they won. The Ravager patrol was scattered, their position compromised. The coalition team escaped into deeper swamp, moving fast despite their injuries and the hostile environment. Hours later, when they finally reached a safe position to rest, War Master Threxus's words came back to Taemin. The massive warrior had said he couldn't have made that walk through the bombardment. Now Taemin understood what he meant. It wasn't about being stronger or tougher. It was about refusing to quit. About pushing through pain and fear and exhaustion because the mission wasn't finished. Because people were depending on you. That was what humans brought to the coalition. Not invincibility, but an absolute stubborn refusal to give up. The mission continued. The footage played on every screen in the base. Someone had isolated the external camera feed and enhanced it. Now every soldier, every officer, every being stationed on Vareth 7 could watch the impossible walk. Jisoo sat in the tactical analysis room, watching the footage for the 10th time. As a human analyst, she had spent months being dismissed by the other tactical officers. They smiled politely at her reports but rarely took her suggestions seriously. Now they crowded around her station asking questions. "Play it again," said one of the insectoid officers. "The part where the human emerges from the crater." Jisoo reset the footage. They all watched as Taimin climbed out of the smoking pit, the reptilian soldier draped across his shoulders. The crater behind him glowed with residual heat. The temperature readings at the bottom of that crater had reached over 400 degrees. Nothing should have survived down there. How deep did they dig in? Another officer asked. According to the engineer's report, they found a supply cache about 3 meters down, Jisoo explained. They used the metal containers as makeshift shields and covered themselves with thermal blankets from the emergency kits. That's all? Just metal boxes and blankets? And determination, Jisoo said quietly. She knew Taemin. She had eaten with him in the mess hall, talked with him about home. He was quiet, methodical, and absolutely stubborn when he set his mind to something. He wouldn't leave those soldiers behind. None of them would. In orbit above the planet, Hyunwoo piloted his transport ship through routine supply runs. He had watched the bombardment from space, seen the plasma bolts rain down like angry stars. He had reported the attack to command, knowing that his fellow humans were down there. Knowing they were probably dead. When he heard that Taemin's squad had survived, he nearly crashed his ship from shock. Now, as he guided cargo containers down to the landing pads, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Humans were supposed to be the weak ones, the fragile species that needed protection, but Taemin had walked out of hell itself, carrying others on his back. Maybe they had all been thinking about this wrong. Commander Velcross called a meeting of his senior staff. The command center was packed with officers from a dozen species, all waiting to hear what their commander had to say. Captain Haewon stood near the back, her expression carefully neutral. Yesterday we witnessed something extraordinary, Velcross began. 5 human soldiers survived a plasma bombardment that killed or severely wounded heavily armored personnel. They not only survived, but rescued multiple coalition soldiers and transported them over 2 kilometers to safety. This demands explanation. He gestured to a screen where a human woman stood waiting. She had been brought in specifically for this meeting. This is Bora, a xenobiologist specializing in human physiology. She has agreed to help us understand what we witnessed. Bora looked nervous, but her voice was steady. Thank you, Commander. I know my species has been viewed as fragile since we joined the coalition, and in some ways that's true. We don't have natural armor. We can't generate energy shields. Our skin tears easily, our bones can break, and our organs are vulnerable. She brought up an image of human anatomy on the screen. But evolution gave us other advantages. Humans are endurance predators. On Earth, our ancestors hunted prey not by being faster or stronger, but by outlasting them. We would chase animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. Sometimes this took days. An officer raised his hand. What does that have to do with surviving a bombardment? Everything, Bora replied. Our bodies are designed to keep functioning under extreme stress. When a human is injured, we have multiple redundant systems that kick in. Adrenaline floods our system, blocking pain and boosting strength. Our blood clots quickly to prevent bleeding out. Our metabolism shifts to conserve energy for vital organs. She pulled up another image. Most species, when badly injured, go into shock and become incapacitated. This is actually a survival mechanism, forcing the body to rest and heal. But humans can override this. We can stay conscious and active with injuries that would render other species unconscious. That sounds dangerous, someone said. It is, Bora admitted. Humans often hurt themselves worse by not resting. But in combat situations, this ability to push through injuries can be the difference between life and death. The engineer squad survived because they stayed conscious, stayed focused, and kept problem-solving even while wounded and in pain. War Master Threxus spoke up from his position near the front. His armor was still being repaired from the bombardment. I have heavy armor plating that can stop most weapons. I was in a reinforced bunker during the attack, and I was barely functional afterward. How did unarmored humans survive better than I did? Bora nodded respectfully. Because you rely on your armor for protection. When it fails or takes damage, your body underneath isn't adapted to handle that kind of stress. Humans don't have armor, so we evolved to be good at not dying when we get hurt. We're very good at being injured and continuing to function. The room fell silent as they processed this. It was a completely different way of thinking about survival. Not avoiding damage, but enduring it. Lieutenant Borvik stood slowly. He looked uncomfortable, his scales shifting color slightly. Captain Haewon, he said formally. I owe you an apology. I have treated your people with disrespect and dismissed their capabilities. I was wrong. Hay-One's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected this. Thank you, Lieutenant. I'm not the only one who needs to apologize, Borvik continued. We have all underestimated humanity. We saw soft skin and assumed weakness. We didn't understand that there are different kinds of strength. Velcros clicked his mandibles together. Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. Clearly, our assessment of human combat capabilities has been incorrect. The question now is what we do about it. One of the senior officers spoke up. Commander, with respect, 5 humans surviving 1 bombardment doesn't mean they're ready for frontline combat. It could have been luck. It wasn't luck, Velcro said firmly. I reviewed the engineer's report in detail. They identified shelter, used available materials for protection, maintained communication with each other throughout, and executed a rescue operation while injured. That's not luck. That's training and discipline and remarkable mental fortitude. He turned to Hay-Wan. Captain, I have a proposal. Admiral Kresh has authorized a high-risk reconnaissance mission behind Ravager lines. It's dangerous work, requiring a small team that can move quickly and adapt to changing conditions. I would like to include a human squad in this operation. Hay-Wan straightened. We would be honored, Commander. There are conditions, Velcros continued. You will be working with our best soldiers. They will not make accommodations for human limitations. You will be expected to keep pace and complete objectives just like any other coalition troops. That's all we've ever asked for, Hay-Wan replied. Later that evening, Hay-Wan found Taemin in the medical bay. Yuna had cleared him for light duty, though his burns were still healing. He was sitting on a bed staring at his bandaged hands. How are you feeling? Hay-Wan asked. Like I got hit by a plasma bombardment, Taemin said with a slight smile. But I'll live. We all will. Commander Velcros wants your squad for a reconnaissance mission. It's going to be dangerous. Taemin looked up at her. More dangerous than what we just survived? Probably, Hay-Wan admitted. But it's a chance to prove ourselves, to show them we belong here, doing real work alongside everyone else. Taemin was quiet for a moment. He thought about the walk through the burning wasteland, the weight of the reptilian soldier on his shoulders, the pain that had tried to drag him down with every step. He had kept walking because stopping meant death for him and for the soldiers he carried. When do we leave? He asked. Hay-Wan smiled. As soon as you're healed. Commander Velcro said you could handpick your team. Then I want my engineering squad. Dongjun and the others, they've already proven they can handle themselves. They're still recovering from their injuries. So am I, Taemin pointed out. But we're humans. We're good at being hurt and keeping going, Hay-Wan laughed. That's what Bora said in the briefing. The xenobiologist. She explained to the command staff how human physiology works. I think half of them were horrified and half were impressed. Good, Taemin said. Let them be impressed. We've been trying to prove ourselves with words for months. Now we'll prove it with actions. Across the base, things were changing. The story of the 5 humans who walked out of the bombardment had spread to every unit, every species, every soldier. Some were skeptical. Some were impressed. But none of them would make the mistake of calling humans fragile again. Not after watching them walk out of a crater that should have been their grave. The reconnaissance team pushed deeper into Ravager territory for 2 more days. The toxic swamp seemed to go on forever, each kilometer more hostile than the last. The alien soldiers struggled with every step. Their equipment was failing. Their protective suits were deteriorating. Even Sylvan, built for stealth and survival, was reaching his limits. But the humans kept going. Dongjun had improvised breathing filters from torn pieces of their emergency kits and parts salvaged from broken equipment. They weren't perfect, but they helped. The filters gave the alien soldiers a few more hours of functionality in the poisonous atmosphere. How did you know this would work? Sylvan asked, adjusting the crude filter over his breathing apparatus. I didn't, Dongjun admitted. But doing something is better than doing nothing. Human engineering philosophy? Try things until something works. They found the Ravager command post on the 3rd night. It was a massive installation built into the side of a rock formation, surrounded by patrols and defensive systems. Getting close enough to gather intelligence seemed impossible. Taemin studied the facility through his observation scope. We need to get inside. External scans won't give us the tactical data command needs. That's impossible, one of the armored warriors said. His name was Corvin, and he had fought in 30 battles. The security is too tight. We'd be detected immediately. Maybe, Taemin said. Or maybe we're thinking about this wrong. He gathered the team and explained his plan. It was risky. It relied on multiple things going exactly right. Any mistake would mean capture or death. The alien soldiers looked skeptical. "This is insane," Sylvan said, but he was smiling. "I like it." The plan required someone to create a distraction while others infiltrated the command post. The distraction team would be exposed to massive danger. They would be outnumbered, outgunned, and had no backup plan. Taemin volunteered immediately. So did Dongjun and another human soldier named Minsu. "You understand you might not survive this," Corvin said. "We understand," Taemin replied. "But someone has to do it. Might as well be us." Yuna checked their equipment one last time before they moved out. Her hands were steady, but Taemin could see the worry in her eyes. "Come back alive," she said quietly. "That's the plan." The distraction began at midnight. Taemin's team hit a supply depot on the western edge of the Ravager base. Explosions lit up the night sky. Alarm sirens screamed. Hundreds of Ravager soldiers poured out of the command post, rushing toward the attack. While they were distracted, Sylvan led the infiltration team through a drainage pipe and into the facility's lower levels. They moved like ghosts, gathering data from computer terminals and recording everything they saw. Meanwhile, Taemin's team was fighting for their lives. The three humans were surrounded by Ravager forces, falling back through the swamp, using every trick they knew to stay alive. Minsu took a hit to the shoulder but kept fighting. Dongjun's weapon overheated and he switched to improvised explosives made from equipment batteries. "We need to break contact," Minsu shouted over the weapon's fire. "There's too many of them." "Not yet," Taemin replied. "The infiltration team needs more time," so they kept fighting. Three humans against a force that should have crushed them in seconds. They used the terrain, the darkness, the confusion. They fought smart instead of strong. And somehow, impossibly, they survived. When Sylvan's team finally signaled mission complete, Taemin's group was down to their last magazines of ammunition. They ran. The Ravagers chased them, but the humans knew the terrain better now. They had mapped every path during their approach. They knew where the deepest pools were, which routes were quickest, where the toxic fog was thickest. They made it to the extraction point with minutes to spare. The whole team was there waiting. Sylvan looked at Taemin with something approaching reverence. "You held them off for 47 minutes, the stealth specialist said. 3 of you against hundreds. That shouldn't have been possible." "Lots of impossible things are possible if you try hard enough," Taemin replied, breathing hard. The data they recovered was invaluable. Admiral Kresh called it the most successful reconnaissance mission in the campaign. The intelligence gave coalition forces warning about a major Ravager offensive and allowed them to prepare proper defenses. But more importantly, it changed how every coalition soldier viewed humans. Back at the base on Varath 7, word of the mission spread quickly. Jisoo analyzed the tactical data and wrote a report that impressed even the senior officers. Hyunwoo flew support missions with new confidence, knowing his species had proven themselves. Bora found herself being consulted on more and more strategic decisions, her expertise suddenly valued. Commander Velcros called a meeting with Captain Haewon. They met in his office, the same place where he had once told her that humans were too fragile for combat. "I owe you an apology," Velcros said without preamble. "A formal official apology. I underestimated your species based on physical appearance. I made assumptions that were not only wrong but harmful to our war effort." Haewon accepted the apology with grace. "We all have prejudices, Commander. What matters is that you were willing to change your mind when presented with evidence. Your people are remarkable," Velcros continued, "not because they're invincible, but because they refuse to be stopped. I've been thinking about this constantly since the bombardment. Every species in the coalition has natural advantages. Armor, shield, strength, speed. Humans have something different. What's that? Adaptability. Mental toughness. The ability to keep functioning when every logical calculation says you should quit. In many ways, those advantages are more valuable than any physical protection." He pulled up a file on his screen. "Admiral Kresh wants to expand human participation in frontline operations. He's requesting additional human forces and recommending that humans be integrated into elite units across the coalition." Haewon felt a surge of pride. This was what they had been fighting for. Recognition, respect, the chance to contribute fully to the war effort. "There's more," Velcros said. The Admiral wants to establish a training program, not to teach humans how to fight, to teach other species how to think like humans, how to adapt, improvise, and overcome obstacles the way your people do naturally. That's quite an honor. It's well-deserved. Velcro stood and offered his hand in the human gesture of respect he had learned. Welcome to the front lines, Captain. Your people have earned their place there. That night, the human quarters were celebrating. Someone had smuggled in alcohol from Earth, and the small group of humans on the base were sharing stories and toasting their success. Taemin sat quietly in the corner, his injuries still healing. Dongjun dropped into the seat next to him, offering a drink. We did it, Dongjun said. We proved ourselves. For now, Taemin replied. But there's still a war to fight. The Ravagers aren't going to stop just because we impressed a few coalition officers. Always so serious. Dongjun shook his head. Can't you just enjoy the victory for one night? Taemin smiled slightly. Maybe, but tomorrow we get back to work. Across the room, Yuna was laughing at something Minsu said. Jisoo was showing tactical diagrams to an interested alien officer. Hyunwoo was describing the view from orbit during the bombardment. They were all tired, all injured in some way, but they were happy. They had proven something important, not just to the coalition but to themselves. Humans might be soft. They might be fragile by the standards of armored species, but they were also survivors, fighters, soldiers who refused to break no matter what the galaxy threw at them. The next morning, alarms blared across the base. Long-range sensors detected a massive Ravager fleet moving toward Varith 7. This wasn't a probing attack or a limited offensive. This was an all-out assault meant to crush the coalition presence on the planet. Every soldier was called to the command center. Every species. Every unit. Commander Velcro stood before them, his voice carrying to every corner of the crowded room. The Ravagers are coming in force. They outnumber us 3-1. They have better weapons, more ships, and the advantage of choosing when and where to strike. He paused, his compound eyes scanning the assembled forces. But we have something they don't. We have soldiers from a dozen different species, each bringing unique strengths to this fight. And we have humans. He gestured to where Taemin and his squad stood. 3 weeks ago, I would have kept the humans in the rear. I would have told them they were too fragile for this fight. I was wrong. Today, human soldiers will stand on the front lines alongside the rest of us. They have earned that right through blood and courage. The room erupted in cheers, not just from the humans but from soldiers of every species. They had all seen what humans could do. They had all learned to respect the soft-skinned warriors who refused to quit. Taemin felt Dongjun's hand on his shoulder. Saw Yuna checking her medical supplies with calm efficiency, watched as human and alien soldiers prepared side by side for the coming battle. The Ravagers were coming. It would be the biggest fight any of them had ever faced. Many wouldn't survive, but humans didn't worry about survival odds. They worried about the mission, about protecting their friends, about doing what needed to be done regardless of the cost.